I've been there standing in the aisle with a $50 budget planer that feels like a paperweight, then getting home and discovering the blade can't even take a thin veneer without chipping. The regret hits hard when you've already set aside time for a weekend project and the tool quits on you mid-saw. That's why the hesitation before dropping a few $100 on a professional-grade machine feels so real. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Makita KP312 12-inch planer sits in a sweet spot between those flimsy entry-level units and the heavy-duty industrial models that cost a small fortune. The first thing I looked at was the motor. A 15-amp motor pushing 12,000 revolutions per minute isn't something you see on a $70 planer, and that extra torque is what lets you feed hardwoods that would normally stall a cheap unit. In practice, that means you can take a 2x4 ripped from the lumberyard, run it through the KP312, and come out with a smooth, even surface without having to backtrack or stop to let the motor cool. What makes that motor useful isn't just raw power, it's how Makita translates it to the blade. The Poly V belt is grooved, which means the belt grips the motor's pulley more securely than the smooth belts on many lower-priced models. I've seen cheaper planers where the belt slips after a few minutes of heavy use, leading to a sudden loss of feed rate and a rough finish. The KP312's belt stays locked in place, so the feed stays consistent even when you're shaving a dense oak deck board. Adjusting depth on a planer can feel like fiddling with a tiny dial while the machine is screaming under you. Makita's large depth setting knob is positioned right where you can see it, and you can turn it without stopping the feed. In a real-world job, say you're leveling a reclaimed pine floor that's uneven by a quarter-inch, you can drop the blade a hair, run a pass, then dial it back a fraction without having to reach under the machine or guess. That level of control cuts down the number of passes you need, which in turn reduces the dust load in your shop. Speaking of dust, the KP312's ejection chute is noticeably bigger than you'd expect on a portable planer. When I was ripping a batch of pine boards for a tabletop, the chips flew straight out of the chute and didn't clog the work area. On cheaper planers, the chute is a narrow slot that fills up quickly, forcing you to pause, clear the jam, and risk uneven cuts. With the Makita, the high-rate discharge meant I could keep the shop relatively clean and keep the workflow moving. The front roller is another practical touch. If you ever try to plane a board with a rough, bark-studded face, a simple steel roller can bounce the piece around, making the cut uneven. Makita's larger roller rolls over the rough side, keeping the board stable as the blades engage. In my own use, I took a piece of reclaimed barnwood that still had a few knots and a jagged edge. The roller helped the planer glide without the board jumping, and the result was a surprisingly uniform thickness. Now, who should actually consider this machine? If you're a serious hobbyist who regularly tackles hardwood furniture, cabinet doors, or floorboards, the KP312 pays for itself in time saved and in the quality of the final surface. It's also a solid fit for a small professional shop that needs a reliable planer but can't justify the footprint and price of a full-size stationary unit. On the flip side, if your plan is to only do occasional light pine trim or you already own a reliable entry-level planer that meets your modest needs, the KP312 may feel like overkill. Its 12-inch cutting width is generous, but it also makes the unit a bit bulkier to store in a cramped garage. The motor's power means it draws a fair amount of electricity, so you'll need a dedicated outlet if you're working in a space with limited circuits. There are a couple of practical trade-offs worth noting. The belt system, while robust, does require a bit of patience to replace if it ever wears out. It's not a quick-release design, so you'll have to loosen a few bolts and slide the belt off the pulley, a task that's doable but not as fast as swapping a snap-on belt on some competing models. Also, the depth knob, despite being large, clicks into place in discrete steps, so if you need ultra-fine adjustments, like 0.001-inch increments, you might find yourself making a couple of extra passes to dial in that perfect thickness. Overall, the Makita KP312 feels like a thoughtful answer to the pain points that plague cheaper planers. The motor's power, the secure belt, the generous chip chute, and the stabilizing front roller all work together to let you focus on the wood, not the tool. It's not a magic wand that will make every board flawless on the first pass, but it gives you the consistency and